Hello and welcome to United Astronomy Clubs of New Jersey. We are about to start the presentation. While we have our couple in-person guests, I would like to welcome our online viewers as well. So while the people are wandering down for our talk now, couple things. If you do want to ever come up to our site in person, unfortunately we do still have a 50-person limit with COVID regulations. However, you can always get free reservations through our Eventbrite, which you can access through our website, UACNJ.org. We'd love to have anyone who's in the northern New Jersey area. I know farther is a bit of a drive. But anyhow, so tonight we have Stan Honda, and he will be talking about celestial wandering.
Celestial wandering, photography of the night sky.
Right. Stan Honda is a photojournalist with over 30 years of experience in New York City and Southern California. Of the international news, politics, and sporting events he covered, photographing space shuttle launches and landings rate as one of his favorites. Over the past few years, he has worked on night sky landscapes and other astronomical images taken in locations around the world and even in New York City. He has been a National Park Service artist in residence in 5 national parks. Stan's recent photos have appeared in NASA's Astronomy Picture of the Day website, Sky and Telescope magazine, and NationalGeographic.com. He has 3 solo gallery shows of his work and has been part of 4 group shows. He has been a board member of the Amateur Astronomers Association of New York and has represented AAA on the UACNJ Board of Directors. So, with that, welcome everyone. I see we do finally have our physical crowd mostly here. So, again, a couple things. With COVID, we do ask that if you are near people, you keep your mask up, and that we do kind of abide by social distancing. Unfortunately, it's cloudy today, so the likelihood of our telescopes being operational are very slim, but we will have at least an observatory open so you can see the scopes, how they would work, and often we do have a slideshow of images we have taken at past public nights. And without further ado, here's Stan.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. And yeah, unfortunately, we have some clouds up here. I'll try to show you what it might look like if we didn't have the clouds up there. I'm a professional photographer, and one of the projects that I've been working on in the last few years have been photographing what I call night sky landscapes. It's really just an extension of landscape photography, and that with the sky really as a big main element of the picture, or a big element of the picture. And thanks very much for having me here at UACNJ. It's a great place to come to when the sky is clear, to come and look at the stars and planets and everything else that's up in the sky. I'm a member of the AAA, the Astronomy Club in New York City, and so the AAA is a member group of UACNJ. So we have some members that are pretty involved in the workings of the site here. So it's nice to be here. I wasn't here last year, so this is the first time I've been back for a little bit over a year. So it's nice to be back and see everything working pretty well. What I do is I photograph a lot of the sky in the way that landscape photographers generally photograph the Earth and the sky, and except I do it a lot at night. And what I do is I'm shooting with ordinary digital cameras with fairly ordinary lenses, mostly wide-angle lenses that I use, and occasionally a telephoto lens. But I like the wide view of the sky and just sort of the expanse that you can get in a lot of these pictures. But also, it's sort of you at the same time when I'm out shooting, I sometimes I see this pretty amazing sky, and it's just nice to take in the sky and see all the stars that you could see. I've been pretty fortunate in that I've been accepted at several artist in residence programs in national parks, mainly out in the West. I applied to some of the programs that are in parks in the Southwest and western part of the country, mainly because that when you're out there and the sun goes down, you really see these incredible skies. You're far away from light pollution, and one of the aspects of the application that I put in for the project that I do at each of the parks is dark sky preservation. And many of the national parks, just by the fact that they're preserving the land and the water and the air around them, and there's very little development at each of the parks, they're preserving our view of the sky. This is a view from Haleakala National Park on the island of Maui in Hawaii, and that's one of the darker places that I've been to in the western part of the country. This is the sky pretty much as it exists over us. We should be able to see something like this from here. The reason, of course, that we don't is that there's a lot of artificial light on the streets, buildings, houses, and so especially we're just a matter of probably less than 70 miles from New York City, one of the brightest places on the earth. So that really cuts down on the amount of stars that we could see. For me, it's fascinating to photograph the sky as it's moving throughout the year, different seasons, different times of the night or pre-dawn hours, and you really see a lot of different things. There's a set of observatories that's separate from the national park on the top of Haleakala, and that's where this was taken, at the observatories there, and it's run by the University of Hawaii, and there's also a U.S. Air Force contingent of telescopes up there, and so I was able to get permission when I was at the national park to go on to the observatory site and photograph the domes and the surrounding area, and from the top of Haleakala, it's this amazing view where it's the summit of the mountain is 10,000 feet, and so you get this pretty spectacular view. And since it's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, the only light really is coming up from the cities and towns on the island of Maui, and you could see the big island of Hawaii in the distance, but the sky itself overhead is pretty amazing. One of the things I do is I plan a lot of the trips that I take around the phases of the moon, and so I usually try to go a little bit before new moon and maybe stay until about a week after new moon. The moon in those phases is really from a quarter, last quarter to the first quarter moon, and there's in the small crescent phases, it actually throws out quite a bit of light onto the landscape. So I don't use any artificial light when I'm shooting the pictures, and so the light that you see in the photos that I take on the landscape is just from the moon. It's the natural light from the moon, essentially sunlight reflecting off the moon and then coming down to Earth. So this is at the north rim of the Grand Canyon, and I try to work in the landscape surrounding me into the photographs. And I think a lot of people they like to see these connection between the Earth and the sky and how it relates to where we are in space. And I think that the pictures that include lands help put a lot of things into perspective. On the south rim of the Grand Canyon, I spent some time in September doing a workshop there about night sky photography, and then in the a couple days before and after, I went off and shot some pictures on my own around the south rim, and it's with fewer visitors. There's actually the light level I noticed was much lower than when I was there before, the artificial light level. So to me, the skies actually appeared a lot darker than previous trips to the canyon, which is pretty interesting. And like I said, I plan a lot of trips around the phases of the moon. So this is inside the crater at Haleakala, National Park. It's a dormant. They call it a dormant volcano. So it's not extinct. It's actually dormant, and there are trails that go inside the volcanic crater. And I spent 4 days. I hiked down there and spent 4 days in the crater photographing during the day and during the day at night. And there are these amazing plants called ahina hina. That's the Hawaiian name. They're called silver sword plants. And the plant that you see here in the foreground of the picture, it's endemic to Haleakala, and in other words, it's unique to that volcano itself. That it only grows right there of any part in the world. So it's kind of amazing to see these very large, and they're very silvery colored to reflect the intense sunlight that the plants get at that altitude. And at night, under almost a first quarter moon, they really kind of shimmer in the light, and they make for a really interesting photo. I spent a couple weeks in 2013 at Wupaki National Monument, which is north of Flagstaff in Arizona. And it's a collection of ancient structures that go back about 800 or 900 years that people who lived in the area around there had built. And it's a fascinating area. Many of the walls are still standing, and some of the whole structures are actually standing. So it's interesting to go around, and I found it pretty fascinating to be there at night and see these structures under moonlight or under the starlight. There's a very large structure called Wukoki, and I photographed that as the moon is setting in the west, and then with the Milky Way behind it. And with the moon setting, of course, it's like a sunset. The light is going through a lot of atmosphere, so the light itself from the moon is very orange in color. So you get this very deep colors on the landscape that look pretty, to me, pretty interesting. And I spent a month at Chaco Culture National Park in northern New Mexico, and that's another site where it's an even more extensive site where these ancient structures are being preserved. And the oldest structure at Chaco Canyon goes back to around 1100 AD. And so this was the largest kiva, which I think they think is a ceremonial structure in the park. And this was a couple days before the first quarter moon, so there's a crescent moon that's setting in the west, and so it's throwing out quite a bit of light onto the landscape. And I liked how it was lighting up the kiva, and you could still see stars in the sky. The moon doesn't really wash out the stars in the sky. Now, a few other things that you could see in really dark skies. There's something called air glow that generally it only can be seen through photographs. Your eye really isn't attuned to it, and it often looks green. Sometimes it looks red. So I saw a pretty good example of this at a park called Fort Union National Monument in northeastern New Mexico. It's quite dark there, and on one night for several hours, my camera was picking up this green glow in the sky. It was very interesting. And generally, the air glow is it's caused by atoms in the atmosphere that are ionized during the daytime by the sunlight, and then at night they emit energy in different wavelengths. And the most common is green. You often see kind of a greenish glow near the horizon in photographs, and sometimes there's actually a reddish glow along with it, depending on which of the elements are being ionized and then emitting the radiation at night. So to me that was interesting. And the photographs I was taking at Fort Union, it's actually in an army fort that dates from the late 1800s, and these are the remnants of adobe walls that were built to construct the fort, and they made for really fascinating foreground objects during the night. And there is a lot that you could see in this photograph itself. This bright object here is Mars. Mars was in that part of the sky during last November when I was there. These are the Pleiades. It's a fairly large cluster of stars that if the clouds weren't here, I think we might be able to see a little bit of the Pleiades tonight. And then this fuzzy object up here is the Andromeda Galaxy. It's the farthest thing that we could see with our naked eye from a very dark site, and it's the nearest large galaxy to us, about 2.5 million light years away. And another thing that you could see from pretty dark sites. This is another photo from the top of Haleakala mountain, and it's called the Zodiacal Light. This triangle of light here is actually sunlight reflecting off of particles along the plane of our solar system, along the where the orbits of the planets are. So you could generally see it in spring after sunset, and in the fall just before sunrise. In a place like Haleakala, it's kind of amazing because once the sun sets and it gets about as dark as it can get, you see this triangle of light that goes fairly high in the sky. And despite the light that you can see from the cities and towns in Maui that are reflecting off of the clouds here, the view of the sky with the stars is still pretty good. Planets and the moon are a great combination. They often make for very good photos. This is the moon, Venus, and Mercury. I don't know if you can see this little planet Mercury there, forming a very nice tight conjunction. And this was taken at Big Bend National Park in southern Texas. I was traveling with a group of friends, and we saw that there was going to be this conjunction between a pretty thin crescent moon and the two planets. So we scouted around throughout the day trying to find a location, and ended up actually finding a place maybe about 100 yards from our campsite that had a view of this area called the Windows. It's a gap between two of the mountains at Big Bend National Park, and that made for a perfect foreground for the conjunction of the moon and the planets. One technique that I've been trying the past few years is focusing very close on a plant or an object and letting the background sky, the stars go out of focus. And it's produced some interesting photos. This one I like quite a bit. This is one of a picture that was selected for Astronomy Picture of the Day, as well as the previous one. The NASA website it's run by two astronomers that pick images related to astronomy. Most of them are deep sky images taken with land-based or space-based telescopes, but usually about 25% of them are pictures that like I take of landscapes with the night sky behind them. And this is at Yellowstone National Park. Every year, a friend of mine likes to go camping there in late September, so I try to join him as often as I can. And we've generally found some pretty interesting areas to shoot from, and some great skies, as you can imagine, in a place like Yellowstone. The great thing about focusing really close on the plants in the foreground on the right side of this picture is that the stars themselves become fairly large, and the brighter stars of the constellation tend to show up a lot easier. So in this picture, you could see the asterism that we call the Big Dipper here, and the two stars on the Dipper part point up to Polaris, the North Star. And you could see kind of a faint outline of the Little Dipper, which is generally seen pretty well from a pretty dark area. In Grand Teton National Park, I found this almost piece of wood that looked like driftwood alongside one of the lakes, and it made for a nice composition. The moon, I think it's right about first quarter, which is a pretty bright moon, and not so great for taking a lot of pictures of the stars. So I concentrated on doing some of these close-ups. My camera's pretty close to this piece of wood, and you can see again the Big Dipper back here in the background, and then the sky itself is bluish in color because of the moon, and generally the sky only shows up blue in photos because of a lot of moonlight. So if the moon is fairly bright, or if a picture is taken during twilight, either after or before after the sun sets or before the sun rises. And at Fort Union, there was an incredible number of objects that I could take photos of, and they had a couple of old wagon wheels set out in the park near the remnants of the fort there. So it made an interesting photo as I focused on the wheel here, and I got the Milky Way and the November sky in the background. One thing still photos can do is kind of show you, in a sense, can show you time and motion, and that's one thing that star trails do, is that they show you, what they're showing us actually is the motion of the Earth. The stars, of course, aren't moving through the sky. The Earth is rotating on its axis, and the stars have this apparent motion through the sky. This is at Chaco Culture National Park in New Mexico, and I'm looking toward a sacred butte called Fajada Butte, looking roughly to the southwest. South would be over here, and west would probably be a little bit to the right of the image. And you might have seen star trails where the camera's pointed at Polaris, the North Star, and you get a circular image as the stars are apparently rotating around Polaris. And in my case, I would try to experiment in using different focal lengths of lenses and pointing in different compass directions, and you really get some interesting effects with the stars, such as this. And at Fort Union, the moon was up, lighting up the landscape pretty nicely, and I did a star trail here. And most of these are the equivalent of about a 1 hour exposure. I shoot a whole series of shorter images, about 1 minute, sometimes 2 minute exposures, combine them together afterwards on my computer, and then you get this long streak of the stars as they're moving through the sky. And this is remnants of a series of chimneys at Fort Union. This view is looking directly south, and so it's essentially the opposite curvature that you would see looking north. You could see the curvature, and it's the stars, as you're looking south, are rotating around what would be the south celestial pole, which is from the northern hemisphere, from where we are. It would be well below the horizon. But if you were in the southern hemisphere, you would get the same effect as the stars as they're rotating around a point in space, which is where the axis of the planet would be facing. In some cases, I try to introduce people into the picture. I think it gives a more interesting perspective, and it gives a real human perspective to the image. You know how big people are, how big trees are, things like that. This was a college course that I was helping teach in Minnesota at Carleton College, and the students were photographing a very nice crescent moon one evening, and I was able to get a few pictures. The great thing about photographing people who are shooting pictures at night or in the evening is that most of the time they're very, very still by their tripod, and so I don't worry too much about the people blurring in the photos. The very first total solar eclipse I saw was in 2015, and I stood behind a line of people who were photographing the eclipse, and to me it made an interesting picture as it put people into the picture. It kind of introduced this human perspective into the picture during the totality part of the eclipse. This was my very first astronomy picture of the day on March 21st, 2015. This was a total solar eclipse on the vernal equinox. March 20th was the day before, and that's when the eclipse happened, and where I joined a trip that went to this island archipelago called Svalbard, which is very far north of the Arctic Circle. That was the one of two pieces of land that the eclipse touched down on. The other was the Faroe Islands near Iceland. This town of Spitsbergen and Svalbard had a better weather forecast, so I went with that trip, and it turned out to be very clear throughout the day, so that worked out well. And this is actually 12 hours after the eclipse. I signed up for aurora viewing excursions that went outside of the town that we were staying in, and just this was around midnight of that same day, and the aurora started to from the horizon, and then it went higher up into the sky, and for me, it was the first time I had seen and photographed aurora, so that was a thrill for me, and I think putting the people in the picture for me helped the picture, and it was kind of amazing because the aurora itself filled the sky. It almost went beyond your peripheral vision, and this is a very wide-angle lens, and it extends past the view of the field of view of the lens. And speaking about eclipses, I often do a series of sequences throughout for an eclipse to kind of show you the progression as it goes from the partial phase to total to back through the partial phase as the eclipse ends. The top row is from the total solar eclipse in 2017. Some people here might have seen that. My wife and I went out to Oregon to see it. They had a pretty good weather forecast there, so we saw it out there. And so this is from about every 20 minutes during the eclipse as the moon is passing over the face of the sun. And the bottom row is from the total lunar eclipse in 2015, and that I photographed from Mamaroneck, New York, from Westchester County. The eclipses are good because as long as you're in the path of an eclipse, you could be in a city or in the country or in a dark sky side. It doesn't really matter. Even lunar eclipses you could see from a pretty bright city, and with really no problem at all. This was the total solar eclipse of last year. 2 years ago in 2019. I joined a tour that went down to Chile, and we had this great view from a valley that looked toward the eclipse, and it started right above. It followed the ridge, the mountain ridge on the right, so it's very nice. It started up here and became total pretty low to the horizon. And then the sun set as the eclipse was still going on. So we didn't see the very end of the eclipse, but it was really interesting to see the sun setting as it was being eclipsed. This last July, there was a comet that came through our solar system, Comet Neowize, and it was pretty tough to see from a place like New York City. You probably wouldn't be able to see it fairly good out here. Some friends and I went up into the Catskills. We took several trips up into the Catskills to see and photograph it, and that worked out pretty good. In this photo, you can see the comet here, the Big Dipper, and the whole constellation of Ursa Major throughout most of the picture. This streak in the middle is the International Space Station. So, as it turns out, as we were photographing it, we had looked up the path of the ISS, and it was going to fly right by the comet that evening. So that made for a nice combination of pictures. And as it turned out, that particular night, to me, I think was one of the better views of the comet, just in relation to the stars around it. So this is with a telephoto lens of the comet, and then two of the stars in the constellation Ursa Major, which makes up the Big Dipper. I think these are the two stars near one of its front paws. If you look at a diagram of the constellation, and it made for a kind of a nice alignment of the comet and the two stars. And in another couple days, we went to another part of the Catskills and got the view of the comet. You could see it's moved a little bit more to the south there as it goes through the solar system, still near the Big Dipper. And then this was another space station flyby. This was a 2-minute flyby of the comet, and so it was the space station and the comet were sort of in alignment for a couple of days, which made it interesting. So I'm kind of moving more into suburban, urban areas as I go through the pictures. And this is from here. This is from Jenny Jump. And this is actually taken over near, if you saw the rock that was on the southeast side of the observatories, that's where I shot this from. This is the flyover of the International Space Station as the full moon is rising. So a lot of light from the full moon. So instead of doing one long exposure, which wouldn't have worked out very well, I did a whole series of shorter exposures and then put them together. And this is taken with a fisheye lens, which kind of distorts a lot of the straight lines in the picture. So it looks like the station, which starts here, is curving around. It actually went through the sky in a pretty straight line, which is the reality. But then we had I brought a class from the AAA, a night sky photography class that I was teaching. We spent the night photographing from here, and early in the evening, the space station flew over. So that made for a nice photo. And this is also from here, taken from near where the observatories are. This is another comet back in 2015, Comet Lovejoy, which came through the solar system. And this a plane was flying by as I was taking this one picture, and it kind of added this interesting dimension to the photo of instead of just the comet, there's the three colored lights of the plane going through the frame. And so this was actually, I'm not sure if you could see this with your naked eye, but definitely with binoculars and telescopes from here, from Jenny Jump, and through photography, I was shooting through an ordinary telephoto lens, so nothing too fancy for this picture. And when I'm in New York City, which is where I live, people always say, well, what do you shoot when you're there? You can't really see very much. And in reality, you could see the moon and the planets. You could see, when it's clear, of course. Tonight's probably not the best night, but you could also see a fair number of stars. Not a whole lot, but and in photographs, a fair number of stars actually show up in the pictures. But for me, the city skyline, the buildings, they're the landscape when I'm in New York City, when I want to go out and take pictures. And I kind of treat them as I would treat mountains, trees, when I'm out in more of a wilderness area. See what lines up, see how the moon and the planets are rising or setting. Here's a rising crescent moon, which means that I was up at about probably 4 or 5 in the morning as this moon is rising, and coming up through a couple of buildings on the east side of Manhattan. I actually go to Central Park for a lot of the pictures that I take in the city, because I can get views like this of a nice skyline across the reservoir in the middle of Central Park. And in shooting from the east side, this is a moon setting past a residential tower on the west side of Manhattan, and it made a nice juxtaposition with the moon against the tower, which is a few of the apartments lit up as the moon was setting. And this was another early morning moon rising with the planets Saturn here and a brighter Jupiter. So this was another conjunction of the moon and two of the planets, which is something that the good thing is that a lot of these pictures I could plan for. There's a lot of software that you could, planetarium software that I could use that show when things are going to rise, where they're going to be in terms of in the sky, when it's all going to happen. And the good thing about the universe is it's very regular, and so I could plan out something like this, go to a spot, and as long as the sky is clear or fairly clear, then it'll happen. There's a few clouds, as you could see, some high clouds, and to me it added to the picture a little bit. It adds a little bit to the sky, and you could still see Venus and Saturn through the clouds, and obviously the moon. So it added a little bit of a texture to the sky. And the big landmarks, of course, are the great draw of the New York skyline, buildings like the Empire State Building. And this turned out to be an interesting picture. I went with some friends to a park in Queens called Gantry State Park. It's in Long Island City, and it has a spectacular view of around Midtown Manhattan, of the skyline there. This was the first night of Eid, which is the end of the Muslim holy month, the Ramadan, and there's the crescent moon is setting right behind the Empire State Building, which is lit green in honor of the holiday of Eid. And so it made a nice, definitely a very New York City type picture. This was shot from New Jersey as well. There's a park called Eagle Rock Reservation in West Orange, and it happens to be fairly high in altitude, I think a few hundred feet, whereas most of the area around is fairly low. But it also has this pretty spectacular view of mostly lower Manhattan up to the Midtown area. And on certain times, the moon will rise in lining up with the lower Manhattan buildings. And this happened in 2017. And I went out with some friends, and there were actually a lot of people there. I think they all had the same idea. And so this is the moon rising just after the sun is setting. So the sky behind us is a very orange in color, and that orange is reflecting off of the glass of the buildings in lower Manhattan. And the very orange moon is rising because we're looking through lots of atmosphere. It's June, so there's probably lots of haze, lots of smog and pollution, stuff that we're breathing in, unfortunately. But we're looking through. This is also, we're 13 miles from Manhattan, from lower Manhattan, so we're looking through a lot of atmosphere, but it made for an interesting photo. And you could also see the International Space Station from New York City. The very bright passes are pretty easy to see and fairly easy to photograph. I used the same technique here that I used here at Jenny Jump. Took a series of shorter exposures and put them together later. And I photographed this, and then I zoomed into the trail of the space station and realized that you can also see the first Crew Dragon that was launched by SpaceX, the first two-person crew that was launched to the International Space Station. You could see the little bit of the streak above it. So this was maybe about 12 hours after the launch, and then the Crew Dragon is catching up with the space station, and the next day it would eventually dock with the International Space Station. And I do sometimes try to do a few star trails. You can actually do a fairly good star trail from New York City. This is from the middle of Central Park around the reservoir. The regular streaks are stars. This is the flight path taking off from Kennedy Airport and then going up the west side of Manhattan. I think this is Newark Airport here, and planes taking off or landing there. This very, very bright streak here is the planet Venus, so that really stands out in terms of the brightness. I zoomed into a couple of sections of the sky just to see what it looked like, and it made for some interesting abstract patterns of the stars and the planes, and that's Venus, more of a close-up of Venus. And then I went further out and zoomed in, and the diagonal streak here is the International Space Station going up. These are stars, and you can see the airplanes with the blinking lights, which are the intervals of the red light along there. So those are the airplanes and stars. So there's a lot going on in the skies above New York City. The Statue of Liberty, of course, is another great object to photograph that really says New York City. And sometimes a setting crescent moon aligns with the statue from Battery Park. So it's just a matter of getting down to Battery Park as the moon is setting, hoping that it's clear, which was pretty clear on this night, and then I think just being in the right place as the moon is coming down. I chose that particular spot also to try to photograph this recent conjunction last December between Jupiter and Saturn. So here's Jupiter right there and Saturn. This was a day after the closest approach of the two planets, where I think the 21st of December was when they were the very closest, and it was fairly cloudy in New York that day. But so I went back the next day and got a pretty good picture of the two planets and the statue. And I'll end with showing a time-lapse video that I've done. And I think the sound should be on. And this is about a 2-minute video. This is a time-lapse video that I shot at Fort Union National Monument in northern New Mexico. Are we getting the sound, Jeff?
No, if they can't hear it out here, they can't hear it.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Are you plugged in for sound?
Yeah. We tested it before. I plugged in, and then it went on, actually. Because, the sound's plugged in. Yeah, find out if... sorry about that. Sorry. Okay. I'll try that again.
It's very helpful when we remember to button the button.
Right. Thank you. Oops, sorry. All right, well, thanks very much. Thanks for attending, and I can answer any questions.
All right, so we will be doing a Q&A session. I do have the mic, so if you have a question, we're going to raise up your hand. I also have, since we are live streaming it, and if you ever can't physically make it to our location but want to actually still see the presentation, you can always join us online through our YouTube, and we can, you can ask questions for any presentations we have. So, are there any questions from our current live audience? Bueller, are we awake? Okay, well, I got a couple chuckles, so I know we have a pulse. All right, just 1 second. Let me walk over, and I just ask that you keep your mask on, and I will hold the mic for you.
Just a little more information on your techniques, if we could get that, on exposures and things like that, how long and that kind of stuff would be interesting for me.
Okay, yeah. A lot of them are pretty long exposures, anywhere from about 10 to 15 to 20 seconds. And I use pretty high ISOs. The darker, well, it's a hard question to answer because the pictures in the urban areas are much different than the picture in the dark sky sites. So as you go out into darker sites, obviously the sky gets darker, and the only light is many times from just the stars, which are very, very dim. So in those cases, I'm using pretty high ISOs, anywhere from 6400 to 10,000 or 12,000, and fairly long shutter speeds, like I said, from about 10 seconds to 15 or 20 seconds sometimes. Most of the lenses that I use have wide apertures at usually f2.8 or f2, and I'm using mostly wide-angle lenses, as you could see, pretty wide angles. In places like New York, or even around as you get closer into the city or more suburban areas, the shutter speeds get much shorter, and the ISO, usually I'm shooting around 1600, sometimes 3200 in New York City. Because in a city area, you're mostly shooting the light pollution as it's going straight up into the sky, because there's a lot of light just goes straight up into space, which is a big waste, and it also affects our view of the sky, and so that's what most of what you're photographing in a city or a suburban area.
Right. On a follow-up to that, there is a question from our online audience that will dovetail nicely with that. What is the most challenging part of astrophotography from a city versus the most challenging part from a more remote area like a state park where it has less light pollution, whereas a city obviously has all the light pollution?
Right, yeah, the city has a lot of light pollution, so you're limited a little bit as to what you can shoot in a city setting. Like I said, from New York, we could see the moon and the brighter planets and a few of the brighter stars. And so it kind of depends on what you really want to shoot. The brighter passes of the space station show up very well in cities or suburban settings. I think the big challenge really is to find interesting foreground subjects, objects, things like in the cities, it's things like landmarks or buildings or skylines. In national parks or in wilderness areas, it's more of the landscape, mountains, trees, lakes, things like that. And because the composition really is the key, that the technical part is secondary to composition in photographs like these. And if you could find a good composition, then you really made a good picture.
All right. Is there another question from our live audience? All right. So while other people are thinking of questions, another couple questions. I'm going to actually combine these two. What has been your favorite place to photograph so far? And what's the place you haven't photographed but you would love to? Oh,
okay. Well, there's a lot of places that I love to photograph. All over the place. I think a lot in the southern hemisphere would be nice to photograph. One of my favorite places was a trip. Well, one of my favorite places was a trip to Western Australia that I took with a friend, and that I think really was the darkest place that I've been. It was really amazingly dark. In the U.S., anywhere in the Southwest, to me, is just great because you can drive out of the big cities and be in a fairly dark area and with not very long of a drive. And so, and there are places like these big national parks, the Grand Canyon, the southern Utah parks, parks in Colorado. So to me, anything in the Southwest area is just really great and definitely worth exploring.
Right. So the next question is, what camera do you use for your go-to everyday use, or do you have a special camera you break out for that one shot that needs it?
Well, I've been using both Nikon and Sony cameras, and so the camera I've been using the last few years for a lot of just general photography and day-to-day use is the Sony A7 cameras. I have a couple of those, and I think both the Nikon and the Sony cameras work pretty good for the night sky photography.
Right. So last call for any questions. Anyone? Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah, I see a hand there.
It's dark. It's hard to see. Huh?
It's the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Could you please reflect on your 9/11 photography on that day?
Okay, sure. My background is in photojournalism, and the company I worked for quite a while is called Agence France Presse. They're the French news service. And on September 11th, 2001, I was working for AFP in photographing the attacks on the World Trade Center. I live in Manhattan, and so I was able to get down there before the first tower had fallen, and spent much of the day photographing in that area. And there were two pictures that were widely used and talked about. One is a woman that's completely covered in dust, and the other is a man who's walking away from one of the collapsed towers of the Trade Center, having escaped from the building. And for me, it was just I think for everybody who was near that area, it was just a completely chaotic day. And as a news photographer, and talking with other photographers, for us, it was, none of it made any sense. I mean, we're used to covering huge tragedies and disasters, plane crashes and giant building fires and things, but this was just beyond anybody's experience. And so I think the effect was I think pretty strong on us. For me, it was to me that was trying to get the human element in the pictures, and so I think that's how maybe why people responded to those pictures, is because they were pictures of people trying to make their way through this day and trying to survive, and which both of these people did, and so and as a photojournalist, that to me was a real story, was just how people coped with the situation, and yeah, it's coming up in September will be the 20th anniversary.
All right. So last call for any questions. Since we already covered that I'm apparently hard of seeing, you might have to wave your hand a little bit.
Or if you have a flashlight.
All right. So it looks like we don't have any questions. How about we just get a yes or no from? All right.
Okay.
So that's going to conclude our talk for today. Thank you, Stan, for the presentation. Thank you guys for joining us, whether you're here or online. A couple things while you're here. When you do choose to leave, please use your headlights. It's no fun when you run someone over, and it's no fun getting run over. We prefer to avoid that. If you do need to use the restroom here, we do have the porta potty to my right, your left. We also have a gift shop open that has a few fun trinkets, a few useful trinkets like a planisphere or whatnot. All the proceeds from that do go to help support us and keep our lights on. And of course, always check us out on our Facebook, our YouTube for past broadcasts, and our website and Instagram. If you have any questions or whatnot, we do have links available there. And thank you very much, and have a good night.
Thank you.